Mike van Pelt is a Christian men's coach, author, and speaker who helps men break free from limiting beliefs, reclaim their identity, and live with boldness and authenticity. Through his signature message, The Power of Asking for Help, drawn from his book True Man, True Ways, a roadmap of discovery to the masculine heart, Mike equips men to step into God-honoring leadership, build lasting legacies, and live with conviction in every area of life. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Joy. I'm excited to be here and talk with you and see where it leads.
Wonderful. To start off, tell us about your background and how you went from being heavily involved in church leadership to being a men's life coach focused on helping people ask for help.
My wife and I, almost 20 years ago, moved to Spartanburg, South Carolina. And of course, the first thing we thought of is we have a young family. We need to get involved in a church, right? We went to a nice little lovely Lutheran church in downtown Spartanburg and walked in and said, "Hey, show me around." And thus it began. As I got to know the pastor, I was giving him my background, and he said, "We have a contemporary worship service here, and we have a committee. Your experience in other churches may be helpful." So I jumped in. Little did I know that was the beginning of what was to come. Like many churches, once you say yes, you're locked in. I began to get involved in that. As I reflect back on it, I feel incredible. I'm just so glad it happened in the way it did, because we relocated and I was trying to find a job. I was in the insurance and financial services, but I didn't really like it. And I was just trying to muster my way through it. That initial effort at the church really began to show me the path that was going to unravel. Before I knew it, my wife said, "If you're having a hard time with your career, why don't you just stay?" Our kids were young. "Why don't you stay home with the kids and figure out what you want to do?" So I became a stay-at-home dad. I worked with a career coach. Like, what do I want to do when I grow up? And so I decided to go back and complete my undergraduate degree. I was taking care of the kids and volunteering in the church and the community, and really enjoyed it. But I got deeper and more involved in the church and then, church council, various committees. And I really enjoyed it because it taught me something that I didn't realize. I realized that it actually took people to run the church. It wasn't all on the pastor. Part of my calling is leadership and administration. So it was a great opportunity for me to get involved in church, understand how a church works, practice leadership. I was on all these committees for a number of years, and I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do. When I did that, things got a little shaky for me, because even though I'd been a Christian all my life, even though I was actively involved in the church, one of the things that was missing, and I didn't know it at the time, was I did not have an intimate relationship with Christ. And so here I am doing all this stuff in the church, and really what it was based on was, well, if I do good works, I'll go to heaven. If I pray for forgiveness, God will give it to me. I was not being fed. There was something missing, and I didn't realize it.
Between belief and relationship.
Oh man, big time, big time. And I certainly found that out as I was trying to find my career path. I was being met with a lot of no's. And then I began to internalize the no's, and it was confusing to me, because at church, I felt valued. I felt appreciated. I felt wanted. In the nonprofits I was doing stuff with, I felt valued and appreciated and wanted. And I would go out in the community trying to find a job, and nobody wanted me. That was the thing that really hurt me in a big way. I recall sitting in church one day. I remember sitting in the gymnasium at our service, and I loved our pastor. Of course, I was on his call committee, right? So I had a very good relationship with him. I just remember staring up at the ceiling in the gym. It had leaked ever since they built the gym. I just remember sitting in the gym staring at the ceiling going, when are we ever going to get that leak stopped? And then this list starts going through my mind. And what I realized was, I'm going to church on Sunday. I'm not even hearing what the pastor's saying. I'm getting nothing out of this. At that point, I didn't know what I was missing. There was something that I was wrestling with that I didn't even know I was wrestling with. So I went to the pastor. We had a meeting. And I said, I don't know what's going on. He called it burnout, basically said, I need to take a break from everything I'm doing. I need to take a break from church. Something's not right. I don't know what it is. And he's like, yeah, take a break. That's fair. Take a sabbatical type thing. I had done some men's small group stuff inside the church. And then I met a guy networking, and we thought, let's start our own networking group. It actually turned into a men's small group because we had this faith-based thing. We started a men's group outside the church, and we started our True Man podcast and the True Man small group together. And we began to really get involved and try to understand what is this world of masculinity. And we started connecting with other people. And I began to evolve as a man and go deeper in my relationship with Christ because we weren't in the shallow end of the pool. We were out in the deep end of the pool, really talking about in-depth questions, not just about Christ, but how we do life together. And it was on a Saturday morning at a men's retreat where the worship leader said, this morning, we're going to play 3 worship songs, and I want you to hear God singing them to you. And they played a song by Josh Grove, which, of course, is not a worship song. It's called You Are Loved, but it's just a very intimate song. And in that moment, Christ came to me and said, I want a relationship with you. You're my beloved son. We were driving back, and Paul said to me, so what did you get out of this weekend? And I just began to melt. I mean, the tears flowed.
To pull the car over.
I said, Paul, I had no idea. I had no idea that kind of relationship was available. And, you know, when it was occurring at the event, I remember looking around the room going, where do these guys go if this just happened to them? Who do they talk to? Where do they go? I started thinking about that. And boy, I had big plans by the tail end of 2019. And then 2020 showed up and COVID hit. COVID turned out to be a good thing because it allowed me to pivot and formalize the life coaching, do the podcast, write some books, and now begin looking at speaking. It's quite a story in total, but, you know, it really, I think, begins by this understanding that intimacy is available. And I don't want to miss that because I think a lot of people float through life and don't fully understand it, don't embrace it, maybe have never heard the message or are wondering, what does that even look like?
And I want to park there for a minute because when you described sitting in the church and seeing the leak and the things that need to be fixed,
Yeah.
there are a lot of pastors and ministry leaders that have experienced that intimacy. And then we're in the situation where leadership in the church is also a job.
Yeah.
And from personal experience, I can say it can be hard to hold both of those things in my hands at the same time. I have learned for me that I have to create times where I can get away, not just with me personally as an individual, but also get away in worship and in fellowship at a place where I'm not in charge of anything. You know, where it's not my job to notice that it went wrong and need to make a note so we can fix it or whatever the case may be. I just came back from a retreat with female pastors. That was amazing. If you're certain roles in the church, you know, we have a service coordinator and she's like air traffic control. When I cover for her, my brain is doing this all over the place. And I have to, at a point in the service, go, okay, now we're good. And take a deep breath and reset, even just take a 5-minute pause in the middle.
Right.
That's an important thing for us. For those of us that we know what that intimacy feels like. We can still drift from it just in the day-to-day of operating an organization.
I'm in the church, and like most guys, we're fixers. That's what we are. Or men, we're fixers. At that point in my life, I was a fixer. I didn't understand certain terminology that now makes a lot of sense to me. I didn't know how to build margin in my life. I didn't know why. I just wanted to be outside and playing, but my heart wasn't in it. It was still at that point all about my head. And so even as I work with men now, I commonly say, help men get out of their head and into their heart. Yeah. It's really hard to fully embrace Christ if your heart isn't open to it.
It's an important reminder for us as pastors and ministry leaders to make sure that we are practicing, teaching, demonstrating, setting the expectation that intimacy with God is the expectation. That not only that it's possible, but that it's possible for all of us. And that's something we want to encourage and cultivate, which requires us to be intentional.
I think that we show up at church and we think this person's gone through confirmation and all this stuff, so they know. When I was growing up and I went through confirmation, I had a lot of questions. Basically, what I got back was just memorize this and we're good. I had a lot of questions, and unfortunately, I kept a lot of those to myself, which is where the power of asking for help shows up. My takeaway is that we can't overlook the simple things. Some people just have absolutely zero knowledge what intimacy is. And unless you really experience something for yourself, a retreat is a great way to do it. But it's also very motivational to get around a group of people who are all looking and searching for the same thing, that life of more, that life of freedom. And it is available. But I have a lot of conversations with guys. A lot of people just don't know it's available.
Right. Yeah. And not all of us grew up in a house or a church tradition or even a school tradition where questioning things was encouraged.
Right.
And
men in particular, this is a problem because many of us, it's funny, we're recording this on a Friday, every Friday morning. I have my men's group. We were talking about this morning. Many of us were raised, many men were raised in a time and a place. I'm 55, so I always call myself an 80s kid. Many of us were raised, and this is not a fault of our fathers. If you fall down and skin your knee, bounce back up, don't cry, don't show your emotions. It is innocent enough. That's how they were raised. The problem is there are these little things said or done at a time when we really needed a hug or a pat on the back. And we were told our emotions in that moment were downplayed. That gets supplanted in the back of your brain. And so you grow up thinking, well, I can't show emotions. I can't show it hurts. I can't. And or something horrible happens to you invariably when you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. It could be abuse. It could be porn. It could be something that's, turns your life into a 180. And all of a sudden, you don't know how to deal with it. And it does come back when you're an adult. These things show up in a man's life, and we bury it, hoping that we never have to deal with it. And what I've come to understand is, well, we always have to deal with it. Unfortunately, it typically shows up in our relationships 99% of the time, right? Your relationship with your wife, your relationship with your children, your relationship with your coworkers. And it usually is dealt with in a very negative way, not because we want it to be. It's just how it shows up. For me, it showed up in anger. I was mad about some things. I carried it around and I would blow my stack very easily. You cannot build quality relationships if you're angry, believe me. More than intimacy, which that's critically important. We have to be able to take a look in the mirror. Will you like what you see when you take a look in the mirror? No. Maybe you shouldn't. But it's important to take a hard look in the mirror and assess what's going on. And it's really the same thing for our churches. What I learned by having a close relationship with a pastor at a church was that it's a tough gig. Man, is it a tough gig? I mean, you are way more than a pastor. You're a psychologist, a police officer. You're just like the fire chief. You're everything. And the reality is, and important to ask questions, important to assess, not just as a person, like, where are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses? How, am I equipped to, do this or that? Men's ministries is a good one. Some pastors are more equipped than others to work in that area. I couldn't help a women's group. I would be absolutely lost trying to figure out if it were me. Men's group, not a problem. What do you do if that's important to you and your church, how do you equip somebody to do that?
So at the end of the day, that's our job as pastors, to equip the church to do the ministry. It's not to do all the ministry ourselves.
You would hope, right?
Scripturally, that's what's true. We've been called to equip the gifts were given to equip the people to do ministry.
It really is important. But in certain circumstances, you're going to have to do some assessment. Is this a strength? Do I need to bring somebody in from the outside? It requires asking a lot of questions. This kind of gets into the power of asking for help. What kind of help do I need? And the pastor's job is to equip the church. They're no different than any other human being. Sometimes there's shame or fear in not knowing this. I don't want to come across like I don't know. And I think the reality is it's okay to not know. In fact, there's strength in actually going out and asking for help. And really, I think, what a pastor's doing in that moment is modeling something really important. It's okay to get help because, so many, the unspoken things that go on church on Sunday is, John's over there in the second row and he's addicted to porn, and Sean's over there in the left, and he's an alcoholic, and somebody in the back of the church abuses somebody. We don't talk about those things, and where do these people go? They need help. It's important that our worldview is that we do reach out for help, not just as pastors, but as people in general. And as I'm always talking about with men, don't bury it.
Right.
It gets worse.
So you talked about men especially, and also leaders, to ask for help. Why do you think, if we're talking about pastors and ministry leaders, why do you think we have such a hard time asking for help?
Ego. I mean, we all
Ouch.
Well, I got to be honest. The beautiful part about being in the place that I am is, and this is maybe part of the answer to the question, I used to buy into this mantra that I was taught during some of my sales training: fake it till you make it. Wearing a mask, keep it real. Some people won't like it, but as I've learned in a lot of my leadership training, you have to be firm but fair. And as long as you're fair, you can be firm. Ego is part of it, but to take that deeper, we all want to be seen and heard and valued. When you're the authority at the church, when you're the leader, you don't want somebody to view you as, well, he didn't know. There's a greater risk in that. If you try to take on a project, it could be something as simple as talking about a men's group. Maybe you don't feel comfortable being the instigator to get things going and get the guys riled up. Well, bring somebody in from the outside and see what can happen. There's so many avenues to do that, but you have to put pride aside a little bit. You have to put, your ego aside. True Man podcast that I started. When I started that, I knew absolutely nothing about sitting behind a microphone like this. And I hired a podcast coach. And I've had a number of different golf coaches. I've had a faith coach. I've had a business coach. The reason for that is simple. I want to be the best I can be so that I can help impact the people around me in a positive way. And I think that as church leaders, we owe that to our parishioners, because if you not provide that for them in that church setting, they will go out and find it. They'll go out and find it. And that may or may not be the perfect setting for them to go find something. Or if we don't provide what they need, if we don't have quality men's groups where they can get together, maybe
or provide the connection with something that's there that we can refer them to, that we can trust, right?
And it's about relationships and building those relationships more than anything, to find out what people want and they need. And I think it's important because we're not building margin into our lives. This is a very important term that I have come to understand and learn. We're not building margin in our lives. We're actually creating more work for ourselves, and our brains are not equipped to be on these mobile phones and on computers all the time.
Right.
And what it does is it conditions us that we need everything now, everything's speed. The beautiful part about going to church and being in worship is it should be a place where you're building margin. You're surrounded by people that want the same thing. You're in an environment where people care, they feel loved, and their concerns feel addressed. It's just a really, and I'm not saying sunshine and rainbows. We know that life is difficult and challenging, but that should be time where you just put everything away. And I think this speediness of everything that surrounds us, you know, even in church, I think we've got to find ways to slow down, and worship is certainly one of those. Being in a men's group, rarely is anybody looking at their phone in our men's group, and we really are intentional about building those relationships, and that's the way it should be. That's what life's all about. That's why Eve was created for Adam, companionship, right? So we're built for relationship. And I think that's an important thing that we need to keep in mind. We're not built for mobile phones.
I'm thinking that struggle of asking for help, and you talked about the pride component of it, and what came to mind was 1 Timothy 4:12, when it says, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you're young," which the young part was because Timothy was young, but set an example for the believers in all these different areas. And that can feel like a heavy burden sometimes, to how am I supposed to set an example in all these things? What I love about this is my one nerdy Greek study moment, because I don't remember most of my Greek, but I remember doing a project with this when I was in seminary. In that verse, it's set an example, how it comes out in English. That's just the phrase that we use, right? But in the original, it's really more like be or become an example. And it fits with, if you fast forward down to, I think it's like verse 15 or 16, says, "So they see your progress."
Yes.
And that the example that we set is the becoming. It's the progress. It's the, yeah, I'm growing, I'm making mistakes, and I'm getting back up. And not fake it till you make it, but we do learn by doing. Just like you with your
100%.
podcast, right? You
Yeah.
started, it was really bumpy at first, and
Yep.
you got help, but you also learned by going through that process. And I think for me, it's really helped to reframe that and go, I don't have to have it all together. That doesn't mean that every person in the church needs to know all my dirty laundry either, but that I can choose what to be vulnerable about, and also choose to get help in the areas that I want to grow in, that I want to be strengthened in. So how do you help somebody silence that inner voice that says, "Oh, you can't ask about that. Don't talk about that." Especially you're supposed to be the one with the answers. How do you help someone deal with that inner voice?
It's a great question. Not an easy one to answer. Prayer, discernment, seeking wisdom. I spend a lot of time now. I remember when 1 minute felt like an eternity, or to sit in silence and meditate and pray. And now I can check out for 30 minutes easy. And I think those deep questions that you take to God. How do you see me? How do you see this situation? What can we do differently? What can I do differently? And one of the biggest things that I talk about, and I'll use the podcast as an example, just being in movement, being in action. You will make mistakes along the way. By the time I'd gotten to podcast 50 doing this thing, I know that sounds like a lot to a lot of people, because the average podcast doesn't last that long. By the time I got to 50, I had a revelation. And it was based on what people were telling me. Like, you're really good at this. And I heard it time and time again. And what I realized in that moment, as I began to mature this way, that God had given me a gift. He had allowed me to unwrap a package that I didn't know was available. Part of that unraveling of that package was showing up consistently and being in action, even though there were failures along the way, so to speak, even though there were mistakes. And, I think the biggest thing that I've come to is that I'm submitting to Christ. I'm submitting to Christ. I'm okay with me. There were many years where I was not okay with me. I was trying to be CEO Mike, perfect Mike, the best dressed, and it was more about how I looked. I released it. What has developed out of this, and I think this is an important thing, is that just being curious. I'm curious about who I am. I'm curious about other people. I'm curious about my environment. And I can be extremely judgmental. All right. I'll admit it. I can be extremely opinionated. But really, some of that has gone away just by being curious because I found out, heck, sometimes I'm wrong. I don't always get it right. But if I slow down and really think about what's going on around me and ask very deep, meaning questions, that I can come to better conclusions. And I think the biggest thing that we need to do is slow down so much of the time. And that's what I would encourage people to do. I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of threw a lot of stuff out there, but everybody's different and we have to come to it very differently.
You mentioned prayer and discernment. Discernment is really, in the context of this conversation, thinking about who's the appropriate person to go to, right? Who's the appropriate person to share with if they're
100%.
asking. No, you can't ask your whole church for help with certain things. That's a disaster waiting to happen,
Yeah.
right? Some things it's going to be a counselor, some things it's going to be a coach, some things it's going to be another pastor or a trusted friend. The other thing that came to mind too is, I think this is a Jim Collins illustration, but in the business world, you want to test something small. If you're scared to do it, try it on a small scale. So what Jim Collins talks about is in the old, in the 1800s, and ships would be going to battle, and you don't fire the cannon. The first thing you do is you shoot the musket and see if you can hit the target that way, because you're going to adjust for the distance and everything, and see if this is going to work. And then you use the big heavy cannon. And your first asking for help isn't going to be like the big, ginormous, I'm putting my trust in somebody I've never met. It's going to start small. Test it out. Test the waters. Have a little experimental mindset.
Yeah. In business, I've learned a lot over the last 10 years or so. It's been very interesting. And I've had relationships come into my business life that will be lifelong business relationships. And I've had business relationships that lasted a couple of weeks because they didn't show up the way they said they would. It's not always easy to find somebody to take on a task. I think the one thing that I do better now in my infinite maturity is that ability to slow down and really, as a leader, as a pastor in a church, depending on how long you've been there, you get to know the lay of the land, right? Who are the parishioners? And you can assess where they land, where could I plug them in, or you can have a conversation and see where you can plug them in. And I do think that's important to figure out who that is, because we're all gifted in different areas, but there's a plug-in point for darn near anybody. And I would dare say there are people sitting in a church thinking to themselves, I wish I had this and this in my life, but nobody's asked them.
Right.
Interestingly enough, on Thursday mornings now, I was just going to be a part of a group, and they asked, can somebody lead this particular section? And I said I would do it. And on many occasions, my Friday morning group has been like, could you lead us through? Here's the interesting part. Nobody asked. And so I've never stepped up. Actually, I'm content to not lead in that situation. I get plenty of that. But as I commonly say, there's so much power in asking for help and asking questions and taking it out to the church and knowing who the people are that can do this and that. The chances that they're being asked to do darn near anything outside the church walls for some people is not that great. And they're probably chomping at the bit for somebody to ask them to make that corn casserole and bring it. I think it goes back to relationships. It goes back to knowing the people that are in your church and building those relationships. As a pastor, depending on the size of your church, you're not going to be able to get to everybody. Who else is there that can help you build those relationships and get to know people in the church? I think sometimes what we fall prey to is, we got to go out and disciple everybody. That's what we're called to do. And everybody leaves the church walls and nobody knows how to do it because they haven't practiced it inside.
Right. What we really need to do as leaders is disciple people who make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples. So that, that means somebody is the lead pastor of a church, unless they're a brand new church plant, they're not going to have that discipleship relationship with every person in their church. We talked about this with our small group leaders.
Yeah.
As a staff, we can't have a close relationship with everybody in the church. That's not mathematically possible. We're not a huge church, but our brains are not wired to have that many relationships on that level. And so our small group leaders enable those people to feel like they've got that close relationship because they've got their
Right.
group of 10 or 12. So,
Yeah.
and that really it's equipping the saints to do the ministry, which then equips that small group to go out and do the ministry as well. In that context, it's a numbers thing. You can't have that kind of relationship with that many people. But in some parts of running the church, you touched on this, that sometimes the power of asking for help, it doesn't just relieve things for me, but it's a blessing to the person to be a part of it.
You never know. I mean, something as simple as me showing up at a church and a pastor going, "Oh, we had moved from Houston, Texas. We had been to some huge temporary worship services. And then we show up at a smaller church. And what did you learn while you were there?" And something as simple as him asking me to show up for a meeting to just share
What experience was valued, adds
Yeah.
value to it.
What did you see? What did you experience while you were there? And, you know, what it gave me was, wow, I'm being seen, I'm being heard. And truth be told, right there, when people feel that value, when people feel seen, when people feel heard, they're not getting this in their regular outside church walls life. A lot of them aren't. They go to their jobs and just feel beat down. They don't feel valued. They don't feel seen. And so how do you create that kind of environment? I think is really important to the success of a church overall. This is not a knock on the church that we went to when we were back in South Carolina at all. It was really all about me. I had to discover me. It had nothing to do with the church. The church, as I reflect on it now, gave me incredible leadership skills. They allowed me to spread my wings, and the results of that are, today are in effect.
Right.
I just didn't have the missing component that I needed to get all those ingredients stirred up so we could make something nice. Now I look at it, especially with the men's stuff I'm doing, I hope I can pass on what I've learned to others so that they can sprout wings. I'm a real big believer that when we have good, strong, Christian oriented, God loving men in the church is better. The families are stronger. Our committees are stronger in church. Our councils are stronger in church. Our communities are better. I just really believe that we need to step forward and help these guys develop. Well, most of them won't make that decision on their own.
Yeah. So you make the case in your book that asking for help is actually a sign of strength and not a sign of weakness. So can you explain a little bit of that for us, especially pastors who may feel like they're supposed to have it all together?
Well, I think that you have to have the ability to step outside your comfort zone on that. The fact of the matter is, you're not going to know it all. You may know the Bible from front to back, and somebody's going to ask you a question that's a complete curveball, right? You're not going to know it all. And to walk around with a facade that you've got some kind of gift that you can cover everything in the church, it would be false thinking, and it would be bad modeling to the parishioners who are looking at you for leadership. Not to sound daunting on that, but I think this kind of goes back to the earlier conversation. You can't have an ego. You can't fear, shame, all these things. And by the way, I don't, pastors go through many of the same thing the people in their parishioners have gone through. I went to a church when I was a child, and unfortunately, the pastor had abused many people in the church. He had abused people in his family. I went to a church where the head minister had a drinking problem. In my Friday morning men's group, I have a gentleman in there that was a pastor, and it was too overwhelming for him, and he got involved in drugs and alcohol, and it was a very embarrassing public separation. But now he does incredible work in the community. The challenges that pastors face as leaders in the church is incredibly daunting in this age. There is a lot out there. There's a lot of politics. If we could go down an endless list, there's just no possible way a single human being could be equipped to deal with all this. I mean, as we're recording this, a week and a half ago, we had a shooting at a Catholic church in Minneapolis. How in the world do you deal with something like that?
Right.
I think that comes back to just leaning on each other, leaning into God. At certain points, you're just going to have to go, man, I don't know what to do about this. I need some help. I got my hand up in the air. I'm searching. I need some help.
I think it demonstrates courage.
Thank you.
Help.
Yes. Yes.
And it also, the flip side of that is that it makes it safe for the next person to ask for help.
Yeah, a very important piece. Modeling. As leaders, that's what we need to do. I have 2 or 3 different mentors that I go to, and I'm like, here's what I'm experiencing right now. I honestly don't know what to do. What would you suggest? And we work our way through it. It's like solving a math problem. 2 + 2 = 4, but I got to spend the next hour figuring out how to get to 4. Even though I know 2 + 2, that's part of good discernment. And that takes time to work through. It does require some patience and perseverance, which I recall the Bible talking about as well.
And sometimes I think even creating a space, whether it's an offsite with your team or with you as an individual, to give yourself back to creating margin, right? To create margin to think through the pieces of this. As you were talking about all the different things that pastors have to do, all the different hats. You have to create the margin to really think through, okay, which is the most critical need right now for me to solve, and how are we going to solve that? Who am I going to bring in? How's it going to work? So for a pastor listening today who knows they need help, but they don't know where to start, what's one action that they can take today?
I say this so often to men. Journal, start writing. I think just getting things down on paper is one of the more cathartic. We don't talk about this as men a whole lot, by the way. I think just getting stuff down on paper, and for some people that may be, typing in a Word doc. I don't care how you do it. I think it's important to get your thoughts down on paper and begin thinking through, what am I feeling right now? What am I feeling?
It forces clarity, doesn't it?
Yeah. And taking it to God and saying, what do you think about this? What do you think is going on here? Be curious about the whole situation. Don't suppress anything that comes to the surface. It's incredible when you start writing. It really all started with writing things down. What am I feeling? That really started by going to some men's retreats. I was not a retreat guy. I'd never been to a retreat. And that first one just absolutely rocked my world. I've been going back ever since. The more I go back, the more involved I get. One of my favorite things to do is be on the prayer team. And it's heavy lifting. When you're on the prayer team, that's heavy lifting. But I think being curious, writing things down, and just working through, and having somebody that you can go to, a mentor. I'm really big on mentoring, and I would keep it small. Some people expand that circle and get too many opinions, but I think having a couple of mentors in your life that are trusted, that are really listen and ask good, powerful questions that get you thinking. I really do believe this. I think we all have the answers inside of us. Sometimes it's just a matter of sitting across from somebody and having them ask the right questions where you go, there it is. Yes. And so it's important to have the right people around you.
It kind of helps sort through all the clutter in our brains, all the things that we're dealing with all day.
My approach is everybody's different. Somebody's going to come to me and they're going to be like, man, I'm not achieving my goals. Okay, let's work on your goals. Somebody's going to come to me and go, well, I want to work on my vision or my purpose or whatever. One of the more interesting things I see going on right now, and I'm looking at the statistics on this, I thought my audience was me, right? I'm a 55-year-old guy. I thought it was mostly middle-aged guys. And what's really interesting is these Generation Zs and these millennials, they're coming out of the woodwork and they're looking for answers. And they're turning to the church for those answers. They're turning to the Bible for those answers. I think these young people are really digging in right now. A lot of them have gone through divorce, have seen relationships fall apart, and they're looking for some degree of stability.
Yeah.
And I got to say, this is another reason why I'm a huge proponent of men's small groups, because these young guys are going to show up at these groups. They're going to eat it up. If, some of these guys, it's flattering, right? When a young guy comes to me and they think, hey, you really got it together. I don't know if I have it together or not, but they view it that way. And so this is something we really have to pay attention to, because we have knocked around the Zs and the millennials, and you've heard a lot of things go on. Well, they're lazy. They don't want to work. They don't, all this stuff. Be careful with that, because if you're saying that, just know you probably helped create it. We need to pay attention to what's going on in our culture right now. There are a lot of young people searching. They want stability. The church provides it.
And those are some of the most purpose-driven generations.
100%.
Which is partly why in every generation there's going to be some winners, right? The ones that are purposeless and are not seeking it, and that's the 30-year-old in their parents' basement playing video games. But the flip side of that is that they are on fire for whatever purpose they have found. They're not looking for a job. They're looking for a job that makes a difference. They're looking for a ministry that makes a difference. They're looking for real truth. And I think that in some cases, not across the board, but in some cases too, the younger generations have been raised with less of the stigma around asking for help.
Oh, 100%. I totally see that. Yes.
They're sometimes even too far to the other extreme, but also
they're very self-aware. Very self-aware. This is not that, but these kids are, and I see this in my own kids, incredibly self-aware of not just themselves, but what's going on around them. Our society and our culture has created a lot of things that are going on, and these kids that are searching for purpose or trying to figure out where can I go to dig in on this. Hey, churches, they're looking for you.
We've got an incredible opportunity. Our church has a lot of young adults and teens in proportion to the congregation. They're so fun to watch because when they're in, they are in.
Yeah.
There was a young guy who he showed up with a friend, decided to follow Jesus. It happened to be baptism Sunday. He got baptized that day. And a week later, he is asking how he can help. And when the thing that he first volunteered for was going to take a little bit more training, then he found whatever else he could pick up trash. He was all over, like, I am all in when I'm in. And so, every generation has something to learn from other generations. That pursuit of purpose and that kind of when we're in, we're all in, is definitely something that we can grab from these Gen Zs and these younger millennials especially. Let's go as we get ready to wrap up here. I've got some lightning round questions. These are quick, like a 1-sentence answer. So number 1 is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I don't know. It's the best. It's right up there, but it's fresh on my mind from my mentor. Believe it shall be done.
Believe it shall be done. Number 2, what's one thing that you wish every pastor knew about discipling the men in the church?
It's available, but you're going to have to put your pride aside.
And then what's your go-to Bible verse when you need encouragement?
I think Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, just trust in the Lord. That's what I have done, and it's made a substantial difference in my life. If you're gripping the wheel so tight that you feel like you need to control everything, we need to have a conversation.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today. And as we wrap up, where can people find your book, True Man, True Ways, and connect with your coaching work?
Yeah, the best thing I would recommend is go out to my website, truemanlifecoaching.com. You'll find the book on there. That's a whole other podcast story about why the book we had some interesting things happen, but you can get the book, True Man, True Ways, a roadmap of discovery to the masculine heart, on my website. My podcast is on there. And really, that's the best way to get a hold of me. I will say this. You're talking about the generations. Yes, I have a speech coach. His talk is about the generations, and my talk is about the power of asking for help. And so this is something that I do want to roll out and begin talking with churches and organizations about, because I think it's very important topic to hit on. And I have been absolutely overwhelmed with people saying, yeah, we need to talk more about this. And it sounds like such a basic, simple topic, but it's almost as if people need a reason or permission to ask for help. It's the most bizarre thing. So this is something that we're going to be rolling out as well. You can connect with me on the website if this is something you're interested in learning more about.
Awesome. I'll drop those links in the show notes as well. Thank you again, Mike, for your time today. Thank you for all that you do investing in men and in leaders. And I look forward to seeing more of what you come out with.
Thanks, Joy, for having me on. I had a blast.